Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Share the adventures of our early pioneers as we explore the development of the Pacific Northwest and beyond. With your host, Mike Roberts, and historian Bill Barlee.
Welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts with you, along with Bill Barlee, our historian and storyteller. And the story we have today, I mean, this one, of all of the ones that you've told me of the potential lost treasure, this one has me jangling.
Mike, everyone has you jangled,
I know,
okay?
I'm easily jangled, I suppose.
Very true.
Where are we going for this, baby?
We're going to the Queen Charlottes. You know, and when you talk about the Charlottes, you talk about an area in BC that really isn't that well known. People who've been there never forget it, Mike. But the Charlottes are windswept. The storms come in off the Pacific on the west coast, and here's a shot of some of the islands in the northern part of the Charlottes, and of course in the old days it was inhabited entirely by the Haida Indians, and they were the Vikings of the North. You know, they really were. They traversed the sea. They went all up and down the coast, and they were feared by virtually all of the other Indian nations. And here are a few of the villages. There's old Masset. Some of the totems out in front of Masset, and this is Skidegate, and those are the two major parts or major villages of the North Island. There's Graham Island and there's Moresby. Graham's at the top, that's the North Island. South Island is Moresby Island. And this essentially, Mike, is a story of Pilchicamin, Hayu Pilchicamin, which is in Chinook, much gold.
Much gold.
And it really is. It really is. It's a fascinating story. It's documented, and it's documented by a number of different writers. And frankly, I think it's one of the most intriguing stories I've come across for quite a while. And it involves the Hudson's Bay Company. It involves the Haida Indians. It involves the Americans. And it's the first gold rush in British Columbia.
Predating the Fraser Valley, the Fraser River, 1858. Before then.
By far, 1850, Mike. So that's what we're going to look at today.
Pilchicamin.
Pilchicamin.
Okay, we'll do that right after this break as Gold Trails and Ghost Towns visits the Queen Charlottes. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts and Bill Barlee talking about a treasure in the Queen Charlotte Islands. And this book, The Queen Charlotte Islands, you say is an excellent background to this.
Yeah, I think Kathleen Dalzell, who knows the islands extremely well, wrote the book about a quarter of a century ago, if I remember correctly. And it gives you lots of background, documents what we're talking about today, and gives you the feel of the Charlottes.
Now, this is important. Documentation to you is the most important thing.
Course.
Now, Hudson's Bay Company records figure in this. They were good documenters of what's going on?
Yeah, most definitely. What we do is we start out in 1850, as we mentioned before, and we go to Fort Simpson, now known as Port Simpson. This would be north of Prince Rupert. So the Haidas had no problem going in there to trade with the Hudson's Bay Company. And a young Haida chief goes in there in the late spring of 1850, and his name is Albert Edenshaw. And the Edenshaws are very, very intelligent. They're good-looking by anybody's standards, and he's a chief on his way up. He wants to hold a potlatch, and to hold a potlatch, he has to have hayu blankets. That means many blankets, and that's the chief thing to give out at that particular time. So he goes in to see the chief trader of Fort Simpson, and the chief trader sizes him up and looks at Edenshaw and says, "Here's a guy on his way up. Maybe I'd better show him something." And the chief trader had received, in the last several years, a number of pieces of extremely high-grade gold ore. The free gold was laced through this ore, quartz, of course, and he thought that maybe Edenshaw would know something about it. So he brings out this piece of rock, he shows it to Edenshaw, and he says, "Have you ever seen any of this?" Edenshaw turns it over several times, says, "No, I haven't." Well, he said, "If you do, if you fill a basket this big," and he measures out the size of the basket, "of rock like this, I will give you plenty of blankets for your potlatch."
This has attracted Edenshaw's attention in a very firm way.
But Edenshaw doesn't display it. But the chief trader, he gives this ore sample to Edenshaw. Edenshaw takes it back. He never forgets about it. And about 3 months later, in Skidegate, the old Haida village, there's a big encampment. It's there. It's broad daylight. There's a fire, because it's cool in the Charlottes sometimes. And he decides to hand this piece of ore around that was given to him by the chief trader. He hands it around, and there were assemblage around. There were 30 or 40 people around the campfire. Young warriors, kids, old women, old men, and so on. And as he passes it around the campfire, each one of them looks at it and turns it over and shakes their head. Or says, no, haven't seen anything like this. Comes to the last person in that circle, an old woman. She turns it over, she looks at it, she looks up at Eden Shaw, she looks back at the ore, turns it over a few times, and hands it back. Doesn't say anything. But after that meeting is over, she comes back to Eden Shaw, and she reaches in a bag she has and pulls out a spectacular piece of gold ore. Free gold all through it. She says, this what you're looking for? Well, Eden Shaw says, yes, that's what I'm looking for. She said, I will show you the place. So the next morning, very next morning, Eden Shaw gets one of the long Haida canoes, and he puts his little son in there. The little son is about 8 years old, called Kauho, and his wife, and the old woman, and himself. And they go through Skidegate Channel. They catch the tide right. They go through Skidegate Channel. They head for the west part of Moresby Island, which is the South Island. So they turn south and go down the coast. And Eden Shaw isn't too familiar. She knows every step of the way. She knows every landmark. They pull into a little harbor. This is forever else known as Gold Harbor, or Gold Bay.
Yeah.
And she says, this is the spot. Beaches the canoe, tells his son to stay in the canoe. They said, we have some work to do. Son's about 8 years old, hasn't got much to do, so he stays in the canoe. They take their basket, and they follow the old woman. She goes up fairly close to the beach and comes across a spectacular vein of quartz and gold intermixed. And it is really something to see. If you've ever seen it, Mike, you'll never forget it. And Eden Shaw is just amazed at this, absolutely flabbergasted. But he begins to work with his crude tools, some iron he's brought with him, and after some laborious process of about 2 hours, he manages to fill the first basket, the only basket they have, by the way. He asks his wife to carry it down to the canoe. With some difficulty, she carries while he's still working on the other part of the vein to get some more. He thinks he'll get 2 baskets. And so she carries it down to the canoe, dumps it in the bottom of the canoe. Son's still there looking at the bay. And she returns to help Eden Shaw. They spend, just before dark, they've put another basket full together, and they take this, they're very proud of themselves, and they got 2 baskets full.
This is work.
Yeah,
this is a day's work.
That's right. They come down to the canoe, and they look in the canoe. Eden Shaw is amazed. There are only 3 pieces of ore left. Clone. That's in Chinook. And what had happened, the son got tired of waiting, picked up each piece of ore and pegged it out into the salt chuck, into the bay, as far as he could peg it. And they didn't know where, and he didn't know where. So Eden Shaw is very upset, but they have the 1 basket of ore. He takes it back to Fort Simpson, back to the trader, and he gets innumerable blankets for his next potlatch. But word, as usual, even amongst the Haida, no matter where, you can't keep it down. And it spreads like wildfire that Eden Shaw found a rock that yielded him many, many blankets. So it spreads all through the villages, and soon, of course, the Hudson's Bay Company in Victoria starts receiving more samples.
They're suddenly cropping up, and okay.
But the Haida are very shrewd. The price goes up significantly. And you get the samples in Fort Simpson, you get the samples in Old Victoria, and the Hudson's Bay Company says, hey, we should go up there and cash in on this. So they go up, and under guise of traders on a ship called the Una, and they decide to go in, and they pull into the bay. He knows where it is, and they look on the shore, and there's an Indian encampment, but it's a mining encampment. All the Haida
no fishing
warriors,
going on here.
No fishing going on. They're fishing for gold, and so the Haida warriors are busy picking up this gold, and they don't want to trade much of it, and they're in control of it. So the Hudson's Bay Company looks at that, and they go up there with a guy called Woolley Mitchell, W-U-L-L-I-E Mitchell, and a guy called Wark, who's one of the factors of the Hudson's Bay Company. They buy about $1,000 worth of stuff and pull back for Victoria. And they think about it for a while. And finally, in the fall of 1851, they'd come in the spring, they sent out another bigger ship, the Una still, but it's loaded with sailors and miners, and there's a guy there who's a coal miner, and he knows all about powder. He knows a lot about powder, and he knows how to blast. So they send him up especially, and they have a big crude drill there, and they land, and the Haida Indians are still picking away at that, slowly, laboriously, tough job. working with iron tools.
Yeah.
He drills in there, this coal miner, and puts down some blast of chowder. They tell the Indians, through an interpreter, probably Edenshaw, that you better clear out of here, and all of them do. So the Indians follow what the whites do, and the blast comes up, and the Indians take to the hills, because they're not used to that at all. And they watch for a while, and they see the whites are scrambling right after, when the smoke clears after the blast, they're scrambling for those pieces of rock that they were digging out very, very slowly by hand. And the Haida, they said, well, and you see, the Charlottes, both Moresby and Graham, were owned by individual families, each section of those islands. And they figure that's theirs. So they start coming back as soon as the blast is over there, and they're scrambling for it. And it's pretty good-natured tugging at first. But as they see that the whites are taking the majority of the ore, the struggles get a little more serious. And finally, the Hudson's Bay Company decides to avoid bloodshed, it was getting that serious, they would pull out. And it was December. They said they'd be back in Victoria by Christmas Day. Well, something happened, Mike. They didn't get back by Christmas Day, because as they pulled into Nia Bay, which is close by, they hit a reef, a submerged reef that was not charted, of course, and the boat hangs up on this reef. And the Indians sense the opportunity. They know the boat is helpless. There's no other boats nearby, and they surround the Una with these huge Haida war canoes, some of which are 60 feet long, and there are hundreds of warriors. They began boarding the ship. And trouble was definitely looming. And around the corner comes an American ship called the Susan Sturgis. And they had heard in San Francisco.
I hear the sound of the cavalry coming.
Yes, that's right, almost. They had heard in San Francisco that there was a huge gold discovery in the Queen Charlottes, and they'd found, by sheer luck, they came in at the most opportune time. They pull off the crew, they pull off the miners, and they pull out into the bay away from the war canoes. And the Haida catch on very quickly. They look at the ship. They decide they don't want any ships here. They put the torch to the ship, and the ship goes up in flames. They burn it to the waterline. As soon as it's burned to the waterline, the Una slips silently into the bay. And into the bay as well went the full contingent of gold they had mined. And they came to a conclusion that was about $75,000 worth of gold at that time. And that would be at about $20 an ounce of pure gold. So today that would be about $1,875,000 worth of gold down in Nia Bay, where the ship sank, the Una sank, in 1851.
And that ore will still be there.
We think so. No one that we know of has gone looking for it. Now, somebody may have. It's generally not a well-known story. And that gold is worth more than $1,875,000, worth about $3.5 million, because a good piece of quartz ore laced through with gold usually fetches about twice the gold value in the ore.
What, just as a specimen?
Just as a specimen. There's specimen collectors all over the world, chiefly in the United States and Japan and in Germany.
So right this very day. Now, what makes you think that the Americans didn't take that off too? They knew there was gold there. Yeah. They say, what do you got aboard the ship? The ship says, well, we've got our gold, and gold's more precious than human life, it strikes me, at this day. What makes you think they didn't just pull it off?
Evidently there was no indication from the Indians who lived in the area, and there is an Indian village very close to Gold Harbor. In fact, here's some of the totems in front of that village, and they were able to see right through there, see who was coming in and who was not coming in. And evidently no one went back and got it, unless they got it in the last 2 years, and I doubt that very much. But the Hudson's Bay Company, despite losing that, did not give up on it, Mike.
So we'll talk about the determination of the Hudson's Bay Company and their return to gold on Queen Charlotte Islands right after this break. Don't go away. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. We're in the Queen Charlottes. It's 1852, the spring of the year. Not long ago, they've already lost $75,000 in gold. Right. What do the HBC do at this stage?
They're eager for more, Mike. They think that vein goes on, and indeed it did the year before. So they send back a very heavily armed ship. This time, they're ready to actually do battle with the Haida Indians. And they come back into the bay, and they see that there are very few of the Haida miners there anymore. They land on the beach, or just off the beach, and they send in some boats, and they find the vein that they had just glistened with gold and glittered with gold the year before is virtually gone. The Haida miners have virtually cleaned it all out, Mike. An example, I don't know whether this really relates to the story, but there is, near Skidigate, there was an old house called Captain Gold's house. And in front of that was the moon, which was really done in gold, Mike, and I think it relates to it.
Well, gold-colored wood, or
In gold-colored wood. They painted it over.
now Captain Gold would be a Haida Indian who had called himself that.
Captain Gold, of course. Now remember, the Haidas became very good goldsmiths and silversmiths.
Well, that's right.
And so it's kind of interesting. Anyway, they decide they're not gonna stay very long, and they decide to pull out. But at that particular time, 8 U.S. ships come in. 8 U.S. ships have heard about the discoveries in the Haidas. They come all the way from San Francisco again, and one of the ships is called the Eagle, and the captain is a guy called Cyrenus Mulkley, which is a strange name.
Cyrenus Mulkley.
Yeah, and he has 2 partners, one a guy called Burgee and the other one called Way. And they decide not to waste their time. So they go through the Skidegate Channel, and they land at Old Skidegate Village. And they decide to branch out. He doesn't know this. There are no charts at that particular time. He hasn't any charts. So he goes out and he tramps every beach. This is Mulkley does this. And he finds a spectacular showing of gold. He chips off a number of samples, takes them back to Victoria, has them assayed there, Mike, and they assay out at $16,000 a ton. That's at those days, so that's about $400,000 for a little piece of rock like that. And he knows that there's a number there. So he immediately goes back to Skidegate and goes in the direction he thought he went. But his memory plays him false. He doesn't find it. He goes back to Victoria. He thinks over the story again. He goes back up to the Charlottes. He still doesn't find it.
Now,
but he tells a few people.
This is major expedition stuff. I mean, you just don't get on the ferry and go there. He has to mount the expedition and get the boats and do the thing.
He had nothing to gain. He isn't telling a story. He had the samples. He went back 3 times that they know of, and he didn't find them. But the word did leak out that Mulkley's lost ledge was somewhere, we think, on Moresby Island. But it isn't the only. So this gold, averaging $400,000 a ton today, is somewhere up there, we think, and it's probably still there. But it's not the only treasure on the North Island. On Moresby itself, Mike, are the beach placers. And the beach placers are really quite unique in British Columbia. And also inland from Old Masset, there are some placers, up the river coming in from Masset, there's also some beach placers there. And these beach placers were impregnated with black sand, and also the black sand averaged about 2 ounces of platinum and just about 2/3 of an ounce in gold for every ton of black sand. Sometimes the black sand was 12, 15 inches thick. In fact, a number of people made a fairly good living on the richer part of the black sands that were coming in from the ocean, from the east side. So we know that there's somewhere out beyond, and you can see it on this map here, Mike, and this map gives you an indication of where the 2 placer locations are, and that long stretch of beach, north of Skidegate, and this is where the placers are. And of course, the reason they're there is because somewhere under the bay, somewhere under the channel, there is some very, very rich gold. And every year, because of the storm action and the waves and the water action, it's peeling off very minute particles of that gold and sending it onto the beach. And here it gives an example of the beach, how it looks. And this is the Placer Beach. And
now, this must be really difficult. Wasn't Nome a great placer beach?
Yeah, it was.
And I mean, they went at low tide. They tried panning the beach, but I mean, it must have been a hideous task.
Yeah, but they did. But the gold is a little coarser. This was flour gold, definitely flour gold, Mike. And flour gold is very hard to separate. Here's an example of some separation they were trying to do in the late 1920s. And they went up there and they put this. They knew the gold was there, and they really couldn't make it pay. So it's kind of interesting, I mean, you look at...
That is so tantalizing to have the gold colors in your pan, but to realize it's such an elaborate process, you're never going to get it.
Yeah, I think so. I think someday they'll have some sort of method of actually testing the waters just beyond the placer beaches to find if there's gold out there. It hasn't been defined well yet, though.
But Mulkley, I mean, obviously, the assay became public knowledge. Yeah. The value of the assay became public knowledge. He went back 3 times.
Yeah.
Has there been any other evidence? I mean, did the native people at the time, did they suddenly come up with lots of gold to make their bracelets and things out of? I mean, this deposit has to be known.
No, usually their bracelets were made out of $20 gold pieces. So the American $20, the Eagle, which is what they made their bracelets out of. So here would be an example. This is what they'd use on their bracelets, Mike. This little piece of gold there.
They would take a perfectly acceptable American coin,
$20 gold piece, yeah.
beat it into a thin piece of metal, and
That's
make a bracelet out
and
of
they
it.
might even make 2 bracelets out of that. They were that skilled. So we have 3 treasures on the Charlotte. Certainly the treasure of the Una, probably worth, if it's still there, and I'm inclined to think it is, about $3.5 million. We have the Placer treasure, which has never really been fully mined to any extent, although a number of people have tried it, and some of the hand placer miners did quite well on it, Mike. They were able to make wages every day by using an ordinary sluice, but when they went after the big way, they couldn't make money at all. And finally, of course, we have the treasure of Mauchly's, and who knows? We know that it is 1 day's sail from Skidegate.
And
but
it's
we
on
don't know
the
which
east,
direction.
and it's on, we don't know whether it's the east or the west side of the island?
I would think with all the placers, it's probably on the east side of the island, but I'm guessing. It could be somewhere along Skidegate Channel, turn north, turn south once you get the outside and the west shore.
I got to think that there's all sorts of these west coasters doing the kayak trips, and they're now going to be out walking the beach occasionally looking for one of these outcroppings.
Yeah, that's the graveyard of the Pacific, where even the Charlotte's down, so it's kind of a fascinating area to walk. And you know, they say there's an old story about the Charlottes that if you don't find the treasures, maybe you should drink from St. Mary's Spring. And St. Mary's Spring, the water's supposed to be the purest in the world, and St. Mary's Spring, and of course the Queen Charlotte Island, they may exaggerate slightly. And they say if you do drink from that spring, you will always return to the Charlottes.
All right. The story is gold on the Queen Charlotte's, 1850, before the Fraser River rush ever started, 1851, 1852, and what would it cost to get $3.5 million worth of gold out of Neah Bay? Scuba diving, is it deep there? Is it clear?
You know, I can't tell you. I've never been into Neah Bay, Mike, and I've never really looked at it. So I would think that it depends how deep the bay is. And is the Una, the ribs of the skeleton of the Una still visible? I don't know. Whereabouts in the bay? So it would require some undersea exploration, not much doubt about it.
Well, the thing that gets me, though, is, you know, they have a word in the Haida and Salish language for gold, and yet we find beads like this that they traded. I mean, is there any evidence of gold sort of in the hands of natives at the time?
Not at that time. They didn't have much value for gold, or chikaman, you know, how you peel chikaman. But this was much more valuable. These are the Canton beads, Mike, or the Russian beads. And no one knows the exact origin, whether they came from Canton, China, whether they came from Italy, or whether they came from Russia. They're an 8-sided bead. They're still found on a number of the beaches in the Charlottes and all the way down the inside channel.
But no gold. This would further add to the belief that nobody's mined that last little bit of Mauchly's find.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's still there. Remember, you're looking at thousands and thousands of linear miles of beach you've got to traverse to find if you do find it.
All right. Interesting story. Gold in the Queen Charlotte's from Bill Barley today. Join us again next time as we continue our look for treasure in British Columbia.